We are going to get started for not quite the last. We still have the evening ahead of us and a very special excursion ahead of us. But we are at the last event here at the Russell Centre, and I would like to echo Robert's thanks as well to Emily, because she is just the most phenomenal event organizer I have ever known, and all of the food, everything, Emily and Sharon, we are so incredibly grateful to you. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome Dr. Heran Sereke Brhan, who is the Deputy Director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, to deliver the keynote address for our event. I had always hoped Heran would speak if we organized an event like this, but she actually became the Deputy Director in the interim, and I thought this is stars aligning. It is wonderful to have her here. Heran is somebody who I read for my PhD comps, along with several other people in this room. So I've been a little starstruck these last few days. Heran did her undergraduate work at Mills College in California, and then got a master's and a PhD at Michigan State University. For many years, she's written about Ethiopian art and history and culture. I'm so glad that she's brought with us some really seminally important publications, including this collection of Gebre Kristos's poetry that I believe she will speak to a little more. So without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Heran for our keynote address. Thank you.
At this point, you probably want to jump and shout and shake it all about, because it's the very last address, and it's been an incredible but intense couple of weeks, a couple of days here, and just a huge thanks to, it feels like weeks, no, just a huge thank you to you, Kate, and to Emily and Sharon and the team here, the students. It's been very, very intensely emotional for us, folks who've worked in the arts and have worked on Gebre Kristos related projects over the years, with nothing really in a vacuum, not knowing that it would take on another life some years later now here, and with young people interested in Gebre Kristos as well. So many circles. Gebre Kristos, with his images, evokes these circles, so many circles of friendship, of commitment, of care, of community and collaboration coming together with this gathering here today. And I was just even thinking with Iakim, he and I crossed paths during COVID at a conference, an American for the Arts conference on arts funding. I was in DC, he was here. It's just the most unexpected things have come together to really commemorate Gebre Kristos. And collaboration has always been a part of how we have moved in the work that we've done. Most of us in this room who've known each other 30 years plus, it's been an incredible privilege to sit around a table and bring up the stories and look at the photographs and laugh about, our aspirations, and then put the muscle behind the work and to see some of these publications and projects come to light. So thank you for gathering us and for giving us this moment of reflection and renewal, and to get the energy back again to do some more work together. So I will launch into my keynote address, and I'll stick to script just to keep time, but I'll deviate a little bit too, because what fun is it going to be unless we jump off script? So to speak about Ethiopian modernist painter and poet Gebre Kristos Desta, as you have heard in the last couple of days, is to traverse time and space, instantly evoking a heady mix of color, energy, fearless curiosity, and courage. Mention Gebre Kristos Desta, and a certain era in Addis Ababa comes into view. The synergy of a vibrant community of visual, performance, and literary artists in which he held a central place, his singular focus on honing his craft, and the boundless generosity of his creativity. One can imagine the early journey of successful artists who trained and mentored at the art school, and the young poets who may have taken equal note of his literary cadence and innovation. To dub Gebre Kristos a Renaissance man of his time is to acknowledge the shared creative enterprise and contributions of peer Renaissance men and women by trying to comprehend the full scope of the exponential changes that their world had undergone from the time of the Italian occupation, around which period most of them were born, to the reinstatement of Emperor Haile Selassie at the helm of the country in their early years, to the full-throated cosmopolitanism driven by the emperor's modernizing project through education and expansion of the arts in the nation's capital. In my presentation today, and I realize I'm doing this very analog, there's no slides to see, so you'll have to just focus on me. In my presentation today, I'd like to share 3 sets of reflections. The first, as most others have done, is on my connection, real and imagined, to Gebre Kristos and the important work of keeping his legacy alive by many in this room and others, including the sustained public interest and concerted institutional support that Gebre Kristos has uniquely enjoyed in the last couple of decades. Next, I'll share some thoughts on Gebre Kristos's own reflections on art and poetry and present instances that show how he was remembered by his peers within the context of the times that he lived in. And I'll conclude by speaking about the end and the beginning that this gathering in Oklahoma offers, and how we might build on this momentum to preserve and study Gebre Kristos's particular contributions to visual arts and literature, and by extension, to reflect on the contributions of the important generation of modernist artists in Ethiopia. To frame my address, I use these 3 poems, 2 by Poet Laureate Tsaggaye ገብረመድህን and 1 by art critic and poet Solomon Desta, that capture aspects of Gebre Kristos, the person, as well as his place and presence as part of the generation of artists to whom they too belonged. I've borrowed the metaphor of eternal flame. So I've titled the remarks today, Gebre Kristos Desta, the eternal flame of an era. And I've titled it this way from my loose translation of a refrain from Gash Tsaggaye's epic poem, Matneye Girgida, that breathes life into Tsaggaye's memory of an extraordinary friend, artist, and poet, variably grappling with the highs and lows of yearning and grief about Gebre Kristos's passing and his unabashed wonderment at Gebre Kristos's lasting brilliance. So the refrain that I've borrowed from is Almotem Gebre Kristos, Neddede enji, Meche Mota. I'm going to channel my best Gash Tsaggaye when I'm reading him, because there's a rhythm to this that's just astounding. So loosely translated, my translation is, who says Gebre Kristos has died? Does he not blaze on beyond death's reach? So as we're gathered here, it seems that Gebre Kristos's spirit, definitely, blooms into full blaze every so many years and offers us a new opportunity to consider his life and his legacy. So by way of personal reflections, my initial introduction to the poetry of Gebre Kristos happened by a chance telephone call from my close friend Acha Mille Dabala, who's sitting here. Acha called to read for my father to me with no knowledge that I had just returned to graduate school after a few heartbreaking months of losing my own father. Gebre Kristos's words, at once defiant and tender, felt like an immediate balm to the pain, and I fell in love with the imagery and simplicity of his language, all of which felt like an invitation to come in from the cold. Over the next several years, my interest grew into avid conversations with another close friend, Solomon Desta, gathering what I could of Gebre Kristos's works at the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. Solomon and I engaged with members of Gebre Kristos's family around a possible publication of his works. In that round, we were not successful. After a couple of stops and starts, the stars aligned, and I eventually edited. And this is the book. There's only 1,000 copies of it, and it disappeared into thin air the moment it hit Addis Ababa. But after a couple of stops and starts, I eventually edited this anthology of Gebre Kristos's poetry, the conditions for which were that also because the German Cultural Institute and the German government was involved, and they knew nothing of Gebre Kristos's poetry because it was in Amharic. And they said, "Can you translate?" And I'm like, "What? No, I'm not a translator. This is a lot of, this is good poetry and it needs to be translated properly." So the condition was that I did some writing in prose at the back in English to basically describe some of the poems. I've done some work on the preface and included some works, writings by Gebre Kristos in preparation for the book that he imagined he would publish as well. So this is the volume. It's titled Mangad Sutun Safi, and I'll say a little bit more about it in a second. So Gebre Kristos's words, at once defiant and tender, felt like an immediate balm to the pain. And I fell in love with the imagery and simplicity of his language, all of which felt like an invitation to come in from the cold. So we continue to do this work with Solomon, and eventually this book comes about. Along the way, I taught myself Amharic typing on an ancient prototype font in the 1990s. And I also gurgled and memorized Gebre Kristos's works while swimming underwater in the hopes that the entirety of his passion and sense of freedom will forever be sealed in my spirit. That was an important exercise. I had to memorize him and bring him into my soul. In 2003, I was honored by the Society of Ethiopians established in the diaspora, SEED, as an acknowledgement for my contributions to the exhibition Ethiopian Passages, Dialogues in the Diaspora, while working at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, the first round. And I titled my acceptance speech with a line from Gebre Kristos's poem, Mangad Sutun Safi. A couple of years later, I advocated loudly and insistently on the publication of his poetry when time came to consider publications on his paintings at the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. I used the same title, Mangad Sutun Safi, or Expansive Pathway, Lifetime Traveler, for the anthology to best capture the breadth of freedom and curiosity that I felt Gebre Kristos's life and legacy encouraged. In the 4 months that I worked on his poetry book, and it had to be produced in 4 months, so it was like, eek, the whole time, I had 3 significant dreams about Gebre Kristos, each of which felt like a personal connection and at times even really impish encouragement from him on the project. So the first, I won't bore you with all 3 dreams, but the first dream is significant. They all are in a way. The first dream is Gebre Kristos Desta, younger age, sort of, we've used one, Geta Makonnen and I, who worked on this book, had this photograph in one of the sections of the book. So it's that era. He's wearing a narrow tie, and he's sitting at a window seat on an Ethiopian Airlines flight going back to Ethiopia. And in front of me is the airline attendant or hostess, as we used to call them. She has a tray, and I'm standing behind her. She's pushing the tray down the aisle, and she turns to the right, and she notices him, and he's sitting in the seat and kind of leaning against the window and looking very just happy to be there. And she freaks out because she knows who he is. And she says, how is this guy here? Didn't he die? Didn't he die so many years ago? What is he doing on this flight? And he's laughing. He's kind of relaxed in his seat. And he says, nobody checked the coffin. Nobody saw that I was buried. And he's just having a good old time. And I'm like, what? He's coming back, So and then the second dream takes place in Ngor, Senegal, where I went because I was very good friends with Gebre Diop Mambeti, the African father of African cinema, who in real life took me to Ngor, myself, my mom, and my aunt. It takes place in Ngor. And then the third dream takes place in Gebre Kristos's 2 studios. He's older. He's wearing a very scratchy tweed coat, and he's coming out from a space where you can see the dark, moody paintings. He's moving into a space where he's working on very bright Ade Ababa, yellow, blue colors of canvases. I can see beyond him, and I give him a hug, and I feel the scratchiness against my cheek. And it's all very real to me to this day. We were saying yesterday with the full moon and being there, Gebre Kristos is present. You don't need to fight it anymore. You don't need to intellectually understand it, but you do need to feel his presence. So I contend, with no empirical evidence whatsoever, except what has kept me connected to Gebre Kristos' spirit, that dreams are also a portal and one way that his legacy has been kept alive. More practically, and fortunately for all of us back down here on earth, there have been also tangible ways that have kept Gebre Kristos' legacy alive. And this has been a labor of love for many, stewarding Gebre Kristos' legacy. Individual and community-driven initiatives, public programs and debates, media coverage, scholarly research, as well as institutional support within and outside of Ethiopia have focused on Gebre Kristos in the past couple of decades. His works were featured in the 4th annual Blaine Arts Show in Washington, D.C. in 2006. His poetry has been read and recited regularly in literary gatherings in Addis Ababa, Kabarichia mentioned this, and abroad. The joint efforts, this is very important, the joint efforts of Dr. Asfawasen Asrate Kasa, historian and great-nephew of Emperor Haile Selassie, and Girma Fissaha, then head of the Ethiopia section in the Volker Kunde Museum in Munich, also known as the Museum Five Continents, kept safe a critical collection of Gebre Kristos' artworks in Germany. These are the artworks that ended up at the center in Addis Ababa. Gebre Kristos' students, most notably Acha, who is here, Wasani, whom we saw online, Taddesa Masfin, Ishatu Turuna, Desta Hagos, and Marta Kasala, have consistently spoken and written about him and given of their time and resources to keep interests in him alive. In January 26, just this past January, at a program celebrating the contributions of Tenanye Warku, another close friend of ours, who was then the program officer at the Goethe German Cultural Institute in Addis Ababa, Konjiye Konjitsiyum and Tenanye led the audience through the celebrations of Gebre Kristos Desta that the Institute had partnered on in the first decades of the 2000s. With Tenanye at the helm of centennial celebrations of German and Ethiopian relations, this initiative took the shape of public programs and debates on the various facets of Gebre Kristos' contributions as painter and poet, and included epically heated discussions on which of the two art forms, poetry or visual arts, came first for him. As part of this celebration, and 25 years after his passing, these two books of his works were published by the IES, the poetry book and that red book in the corner that you see. And I lost my place. Elizabeth Walde-Georgis, then the director of the Institute of Ethiopian Studies, negotiated, this was very important, to bring the publication projects to the Institute. She brought them from the German Cultural Institute over to IES. And then, though dated 2004, the Journal of Ethiopian Studies published around this time, around 2006, dedicated a special issue for Gebre Kristos and Iskender in Amharic and English, edited by another good friend, Shifarraw Baqqala, historian, emeritus professor. And it included essays and reflections of scholars, peers, and students, including Asfaw Damte, Ishatu Turuna, Bekke Baqqala Makonnin, Gosa Gebre Selassie, and Elizabeth Walde-Georgis. In 2006, the Goethe German Cultural Institute Gebre Kristos Desta Museum of Modern Art, only one of two named of the Goethe cultural centers, named after individuals in the cultural institution's history, was inaugurated in the beautifully restored former home of the Crown Prince on one of Addis Ababa University's campuses. Fasil Georgis, a very accomplished preservationist and historical architect, did the renovations. With the concerted effort of former university president Andreas Eshete and former ambassador to the US Samuel Assefa, Gebre Kristos' works were moved to Ethiopia under the stewardship of Addis Ababa University with the intention of keeping them on permanent exhibition at this museum. Now, these are the big ways that Gebre Kristos has been remembered institutionally. But it's worth mentioning, one bright day when I had moved back and was living in Addis Ababa, the person, Gashman Gasha, who took care of the gardens and was sort of the guard in the house, he and I lived together in the same compound, came into the house one day randomly, and that book of paintings was on the coffee table. Now, Gashman Gasha, as I would know him, has lived in this vocation of being a gardener in people's homes over the years and being a guard. And he looks across and sees this book there, and he says, "That's Gebre Kristos, isn't it?" Out of the blue. And I said, Gashmangasha, how would you know this? Yes, it is, but how would you know this? So then Gashmangasha goes on to reveal that he was a waiter at an Italian restaurant in Piazza where Gebre Kristos would go. And so he knew him very well. And he was like, yes, Gebre Kristos would come to to the restaurant and we'd have conversations. Like, it's very random things. And then suddenly Gebre Kristos is remembered and he's in this space. My mom has memories of a couple of encounters with Gebre Kristos, and always with him commenting about perfume. Like Shito was, are you wearing Chanel, or are you wearing, like, he knew perfume, Dior or whatever it was. So, he was a man of the ages, like a Renaissance man. So, and so, given all of this, I think we can say Gebre Kristos has arguably garnered the most public attention, really, of the three pure modernist painters, Skender Bogosian and Afwerk Tekle being the other two, at least within Ethiopia. And perhaps a lot of that has to do also with the fact that he wrote poetry, and he wrote poetry in Amharic. So maybe there's a way that people have kind of retained Gebre Kristos in a literary sense as well. This commemoration, now taking place 45 years after Gebre Kristos's passing, is also a very significant bookend to our knowledge about his last years, one that provides most of us really solace and additional perspective to the otherwise bleak circumstances that we all understand in common that happened at the end of his life, that he left his beloved country under abrupt and untenable circumstances. Then, after a period of struggling with refugee life in Kenya and West Germany, he arrived in Oklahoma, only to die of heartbreak, a fish out of water, outside of time and place, and in a strange land that he could not successfully ever navigate. And I'll say a little bit about why we all, most of us have this impression, which is now just very, very incredibly kind of changed and evolved and transformed. Gebre Kristos's reflections on art and poetry, and then the way that he is remembered by his peers, his friends. In reflections on the power of visual art and the creative process of an artist, Gebre Kristos understood the dynamics of individual agency, as well as global forces at play in shaping and in informing modernist sensibilities. In his 1965 acceptance speech of the Haile Selassie I Foundation Prize, Gebre Kristos noted, quote, "Aesthetics is a force that expresses civilization. While the measure of human development are human beings themselves, the modern being should think of himself as a key to development and not as knowledge intrinsic to himself. The painter's outlook on the world and his interpretation of nature, as well as how he seeks knowledge and how he can be innovative to acquire that knowledge and unravel the truth, is highly important. Today, art is not narrowly defined, but can be articulated through different and innovative approaches." To Elsu's point about innovation and being, a mirror of your time. The biggest joy is the process of creation and the outcome of the product. Many of the common descriptors used, end quote. Many of the common descriptors used to denote what is now dubbed early 20th century German Expressionism, which centered on the belief that art should reflect and cause emotions and states of mind, align with Gebre Kristos's works. Bold, colorful, psychologically depicting simplified forms and capturing essences or feelings. Thick strokes and heavy lines to heighten drama of the work. Vibrant hues to draw up particular emotions. And arguably, as has been said, these same sensibilities are evident in Gebre Kristos's poetry, with language that is deceptively simple and poetic structures that at times seem sparse and unadorned. Gebre Kristos evokes deep and raw passions, whimsical lyricism, devoid of mystique, and an inviting playfulness. His works appeared in print in the local newspapers of the time, Zaire Ethiopia, Addis Zaman, and Ethiopia Dums, as well as Menin. Even more memorably, Gebre Kristos would read his works at the Creative Arts Center, Beit Tawnet wa Tibabat, currently the Bahal Ma'akal, or the Cultural Center at Addis Ababa University, to dramatic effect and thunderous applause. The receptive audience at times is unsure about whether to accept what they witnessed as performance or literary prowess, but they liked it anyway. The Beta Taunet Babat was indeed the right place for such experimental works to be staged and performed. Young students like Jonas Admasu and Haile Garima, who went on to become giants in Ethiopian literature and African cinema, respectively, would jostle to find space to watch or find other moments to interact with this generation of artists who presented there. Both have shared with me personally how meaningful it was to see Gebre Christos's bold creative curiosity or garner a word of encouragement from him in this setting. And he was very generous with talking to students and being present in conversations with them, mentoring them along. In the unfinished preface of the future poetry book that he had hoped to establish, Gebre Christos seems aware of the pioneering effort he was engaged in. As part of the journey towards finding one's voice, he emphasizes the need for study and research to build a broader perspective before embarking on one's path. Despite the power and pitfalls of language, Gebre Christos insists on the right to pursue new impetus and to be unafraid to explore new poetic form, even while he seeks to minimize the perceived mystique of creative process. Gebre Christos's close friend, art critic Solomon Desta, always maintained that Gebre Christos was a better poet than a painter. He captures the impact and aftershocks of Gebre Christos's poetry in his essay Letters from Addis Ababa in African Arts in 1970. Quote, Gebre Kristos Desta, a painter who's perhaps overly cerebral on his canvas, is so far the only Ethiopian poet who, unwittingly or not, has unleashed a raging controversy in the local papers as to whether his poems are poems at all. It's very ironic because this is what happens to Solomon's poems as well later on. It's difficult to believe that the journalists failed to see the sparse beauty of his rhythm in several dimensions. One assumes that his offense has been to break with the sedate tradition of Amharic poetry, which, put grossly, amounts to variations on the kind of poetry Alexander Pope wrote. It's as if Gebre Christos had tried to make Japanese poems pass for Chinese. When the first volume of his collected poems appears, chances are that Amharic poetry might never be the same again. And perhaps it's a fitting corollary to his lasting influence that we can also add, though the poetry book was published 2 decades after his passing, it was immediately embraced as relevant, with as diverse a group of people as musician Teddy Afro and Mikael Balaina, who put one of his poems to music, and contemporary poets and writers as Badulu Akjira and Alemayo Galagai, and even as recently as last week, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I watch these series on YouTube, random Ethiopia content series, and recently I'm watching this one called Campus, and just last week. So it's about a group of theater students at Addis Ababa University, and one of them dramatically on stage begins to recite Gebre Christos's works with a candle and a red backdrop. It's very dramatic, but he is drawn to tears in this performance, and it's part of a storyline that they have in the show. But it was just really heartfelt. Like Gebre Christos, he just encountered him yesterday, and it's very much alive. So this also gives me hope that his work lands somewhere, and then people take it and run and make it theirs, and then create new things out of that. I'll move to how Gebre Christos is remembered by his peers. There's almost unanimous agreement about some of Gebre Christos's personality traits: his generosity with his time, his money, and his talents, how he gifted his paintings to friends and for causes he believed in with intention, and shared his poetry through public readings and through newspaper prints. How his unbridled curiosity included learning to make injera with the woman who cooked for him, perhaps seeking to experience the tactile and to understand the philosophical notion of the infinite in the shape of the injera and the eyes within. In a celebration of his life and works at the National Museum of African Art in 2003, also recalled Gebre Christos's finger-licking good salads and his tireless focus of working on his feet all night on his paintings. We've seen some of the images. Some also speak about Gebre Kristos's physical fitness. He was an amateur boxer, and charisma. There's a story about how he embraced the physical changes he was experiencing with the loss of melanin caused by vitiligo by dubbing his body a changing canvas that offered abstract possibilities every day. Gebre Kristos's passionate expressiveness and sensitivity inspired fellow poet Tsaggaye Gebremetin to pen Kakam Tamari early on in their friendship. And I'll say more about this short-lived and culturally significant weekly gathering that brought together these artists that took place in the early 1960s when this poem was first read. But it was written in 1955 Ethiopian calendar, 1960 through 63 Gregorian calendar, and it's included in Gash Tsaggaye's book, Asatwe Ababa. It offers us a glimpse into a gathering of writers and wannabes very early on in their journey of establishing themselves and finding their voice. የባህር ቅርድዶች የፍቅር ቃጠሎ ሲያነብ አንበል ብሎ ሲተች ዝግ ብሎ ቢራዬን እንዳያስኩ እንደሱ እያስተዋልኩ ያ ባለቆማዳው እከካም ተማሪ በዚህ ተመስሎ በዚያም ተመስጬ ያ ለማኝ ቅማላም ተማሪ በኔም ተመስሎ እሱ ኖሯል ቀሪ እሱ ኖሯል ቀሪ. The mesmerizing incantations of the young poet before him, before Gash Tsaggaye, presumably Gebre Kristos, provides an entry point rich with possibility and imagery for Tsaggaye's musings. The poem is at once filled with loathing and secret envy at the seemingly pauper student presented in the abstract, who nonetheless exudes effortless authenticity when juxtaposed against the learned and more polished yet struggling poet who's navigating, which would be that group, who's navigating a sense of dislocation and the shifting territory, presumably of identity and of belonging. And I'll say a little bit about this group of people that study abroad and come back. So just telescoping out briefly within the context of the period, as with the generation of African modernist writers, painters, and playwrights that defined post-colonial resistance, reflexive interrogation, and new directions in the arts, those who greatly influenced the tenor and reach of artistic flourishing in Addis Ababa of the 1960s, referred to as the Golden Age or Addis Spring, were born in the decade between 1930 and 1940, during the period of Italian occupation in 1935. So just casting a quick look, we can see this generational distribution. 1932, painter and poet Gebre Kristos Desta, artist Afwerk Takle were born. 1933-34, writer and journalist Birhanu Zarihun was born. 1936, poet and playwright Tsaggaye Gebremetin, novelist and playwright Dainacho Warqu, novelist and translator Sahle Sillasse Birhane Mariam, writer Sibhat Gebre እግዚአብሔር are born. 1937, Iskender Bogosian, painter, cultural critic and philosopher Solomon Deresa, stage and film actor and writer Tesfaye Gessese, and Wendy's a part of that generation, she's smiling quietly over there, were born. And then later, 1939, towards the end of the decade, journalist and writer Ba'alu Garma are born. And then in the earlier generation, Mengistu Lemma was born in 1924, Ato Allah Farag Salam 24-25. So there is a generation that precedes this generation. But you figure, the memory of the Italian invasion and the psychic terror and triumph of the first encounter at Adwa, even 1896, was still likely relatively fresh 39 years later. The boisterous bravado of Italian fascist rhetoric, pitted against the dogged determination and insistence on dignity and liberty of Ethiopians, was all swirling about at the time of their birth. Their families, too, would no doubt have been deeply affected in direct and indirect ways by this colonial aggression. And fragments of these memories are captured in reflection by some. There's an interview of Dainacho Warqu, who remembers the humiliation of his father, who happens to also be my grandfather, by an Italian officer. Tsaggaye Gebremetin, Dainacho is my uncle, I should say. Tsaggaye Gebremetin, who remembers an encounter with patriotic fighter Balai Zallaka in an Ambo prison. So though it's difficult to track, we can assume that the resonance of this resistance in turn shaped prevailing values of this generation of artists, firmly grounding their identity and sense of place and belonging. Though likely too young to remember, they would have also grown up through the early years of the imperial restoration in 1941 and the country's eventual stabilization. Although their individual stories and trajectories were varied, their collective path and common accomplishments were thus inextricably linked in direct and indirect ways to Emperor Haile Selassie's modernization project that placed education and the arts at its core. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit just to provide a little bit of context. I'm relying very much on Shufar Rao's research, detailing the context of the 1940s and the landscape of the time then, where generations of young and educated Ethiopians had been lost to Italian violence in Addis Ababa. There were few elementary schools or askola and limited infrastructure developments to speak of. Even while struggling to reestablish his own authority in light of his exile and absence, Emperor Haile Selassie was navigating the political pressures of British colonial interests to include the country under a quasi-protectorate by embedding advisors into all branches of the large civilian and administrative machinery that he envisioned. And as part of this, the emperor organized the army into a single national unit, complete with ground, air, and naval forces. The tribute system was replaced by taxation. Regional powers, most of them, their powers were diminished after the war. They were absorbed into a fast transforming elite society. Concerted effort to establish a strategy for economic development through the 1940s and 1950s resulted in the growth of GDP, an increase of money in circulation, and an early market for shares and a future stock market, which all indicated the beginnings of economic modernization. Infrastructural development was also making steady progress. Telecommunications, international airline services, Ethiopian Airlines was established in 1943, and modest gains had also occurred in the expansion of health services. Most critical to the emperor's vision of development was the need for trained personnel to fill and make functional the new bureaucracy. And almost immediately after his return, the government took the first measure of opening schools for an estimated few hundred pupils from former native schools and those returning from exile abroad. There was an acute shortage of everything needed, from buildings to blackboards to teachers, curricula, and textbooks. The first secondary school, Haile Selassie the first secondary school, or Kotebe, was opened in 1943, the same year that the first among the young men and women who moved through primary school at unprecedented speed. 43 of those of the most promising sat to take their London matriculation exams. Mengistu Lemma, Afewerki Tekle, and Sibhat Gebre, along with many others, benefited from this policy of accelerated promotion. When the second secondary school, General Wingate School, opened in 1946, then the University College of Addis Ababa also opened in 1950 and began offering classes. So that began to give this generation of young men and women an opportunity to stay and study at home. Less by dint of choice than circumstance, the paths and educational trajectories of this generation of artists was similar. If they attended elementary school elsewhere, most ended up in Addis Ababa for secondary and tertiary schooling, often at Kotebe, Tafari Mekonnen, and eventually General Wingate, and at the University College or abroad. Gebre Kristos completed elementary school in Harar, then joined Kotebe Haile Selassie the first school, and later went to General Wingate Secondary School. And as part of the broader colonial enterprise to dislocate, displace, and dwarf local artistic expression throughout the continent and beyond, those who attended such schools were immersed in British literature and poetry, and by extension, the cultural values of its related worldview. William Shakespeare ranks high among those who left an indelible impact on African writers of this generation, and not surprisingly, his influence and legacy in Africa is complicated. On the one hand, Shakespeare was introduced as part of British colonial effort to establish cultural dominance in the 19th century. On the other hand, much as early modernist artists across the continent and in Europe had done, playwrights and writers in post-colonial and newly independent Africa used Shakespeare's works to deconstruct colonial hegemony generally, and specifically to articulate and reclaim African agency in determining its cultural future. Translations and adaptations of Shakespeare's works were instead used to demonstrate and test the capacity of African languages and literature. So you have Gash Tsaggaye doing this in Ethiopia, we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, we have the Tanzanian president, Julius Nyerere doing translations in Tanzania, and so on. So we learn from this generation of artists, and particularly in this case, writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, about his experience with Shakespeare in 1950s Kenya, where British mission schools had banned independent African schools from functioning and where students were immersed in performing and reciting Shakespeare. So this is Ngugi speaking, I quote, "By the end of 4 years, I had seen a performance of As You Like It in 1955, King Henry V in 1956, A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1957, and King Lear. Remarkably, Shakespeare's sonnet 18, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, was a popular refrain for young men trying to woo young women in Kenya. Beyond the sense of displacement and affront posed by this cultural encounter, the introduction of new forms and melding into a broader worldview also presented possibilities for interrogation and self-discovery for African writers of this generation. In Addis Ababa, the newly established schools were also the place where lasting connections and friendships, simmering rivalries, and competition would form. Gebre Kristos met Afwerk Tekle and Mengistu Lemma at Kotebe. Though Aleka Desta and Aleka Lemma, their fathers were both church-learned scholars in Harar. And the stories abound. Mengistu and Afwerk are said to be lifelong friends whose capacity to annoy each other reached epic proportions and involved a council of arbitrators. Mengistu Lemma's razor-sharp wit would often rankle and egg those around him, including Gebre Kristos, who may have threatened a physical response when provoked on more than one occasion. Tsaggaye and Danyacho's disagreements were well known. Mengistu and Tsaggaye's rivalries played out in public, with newspapers gleefully debating their literary approaches and outsized personalities. In later reflections, Solomon Desta would share with me that the experience at these schools also broadened his sense of identity, with students who came from different corners of the country boarding together, bickering and just spending time, waking up and going to sleep together as young men in these dorms, and they eventually emerged as a group he considered his immediate family, on par, if not closer, than his biological parents and siblings. And Solomon, I'd like to bring him into the room as well. Solomon captures the heady mix of people, talents, and ideas as he reflects back in light of the full moon, Bati in Afan Oromo. So this is from the volume Zebat el-Fitu, Welelotat, that Geta and I also helped publish. ሳይሾሙ ሊያጋፍሯት ካሉባልታ ሊከልሏት አርፈው የማይተኙ የሸገር ባለቅኔያት በጊዜ ቀስት በአያቴ ድምፅ ታጥረው አቦ ቢሪ ከቀኪ ሐሰኑ ወዳጅ ከወሎ ከአክሱም ሰፈር እነ ስብሃት እነ ተስፋዬ ገሰሰ ከሐረር ዳኛቸው ወርቁ ከይፋት መንግስቱ ካለቃ ለማ ሀገር ምናልባት ካንኮበር ገብረ ክርስቶስ ደስታ ከወደ ሐሮማያ ከርሞም ከጉለሌ ካደግንበት ዊንጌት ትምህርት ቤት ዮሐንስ አድማሱ መመናቀሯን ከሐረር ሲታዘባት እስክንድር መልከማነሽ ሲላት ተቃጥሎ እስኪላላጥ እያሳለው ሲከተላት ሜሪ አርምዴ ኮርኩራ ድንጉላ ባዝራ ከደራ እነፍሬው ገብረ ሕይወት ሰንቀው ከጎንደር ዓለሙ አጋ ከአዲስ አበባ ታጠቅን ሲጠራ 6 ኪሎ ቲያትር ወኪነ ጥበባት ቤት ተስፋዬ ለማ ከጎጃም ከወላይታ ሙዚቃ አስጭኖላት. So it's really, really the directions and the backgrounds and what these people come with into Addis Ababa is incredibly just breathtaking. And he captures it all in one verse, just this confluence of people into one place in Addis Ababa, into one city. Shuferrao also similarly traces the diversity of backgrounds of this generation of artists and pinpoints that their education was the one commonality that shaped their shared worldview. So this is Shuferrao. Men born in the same time bracket in the 1930s came from different parts of the country: Wallagga, Ilubabor, Harar, Ambo, Addis Ababa, Gurageland, Adwa, belonged to different ethnic groups: Amhara, Oromo, Gurage, Tigray, belonged by birth to Ethiopian Orthodox, Protestant Church, Sebahat, Catholic Church, Salaslassi ምናልባት SS. Social backgrounds varied, but nothing seemed to have prepared them for future careers. None came from the middle class. There was no middle class anyway. Some were urban, some had rural backgrounds. And what paved the way for their success is their education. They had common first-class primary and secondary school education, excellent command of English, mastery of English literature. They joined the artistic community in Europe. Arts and literature was, they were very familiar with them. All of them loved to read, voraciously consumed world classics, Camus, Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and they discussed world literature, theater, cinema, music, and discourses in philosophy, and also art trends. So this generation of artists would come of age this way, often with the emperor's personal involvement and patronage. They would later go abroad and for further education. The earlier generation, Mengistu Lemma and Afolk Tekle, went to the United Kingdom. Iskender Tsaggaye and Sereke Brhan went to the UK, and eventually Iskender to Paris. Tesfaye Gassese, Danyacho Warku, and earlier Alle Falaga Salam would go to the US. Sibhat and Solomon to France, and Gebre Kristos Desta to Germany. They'd meet in Paris and London and in early gatherings of the Ethiopian Students Association. The first conference of this took place in Bonn in 1960. After one such conference, Asfaw Damte recalls entering a cafe in Cologne and running into 3 Ethiopians seated there. He begins an intense rhetorical discussion with one on the merits of empiricism versus scholasticism, socialization versus reason, and the philosophies of John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. Impressed by the man's knowledge and conviction, and unaware that he's speaking to Gebre Kristos Desta, eventually they all return from abroad and they reconvene in Addis Ababa. At first, some meet regularly on Fridays at a gathering begun by Asfaw Damte and hosted at some of their homes on a rotating basis. That's where that poem gets read. They met with the express intent of exchanging ideas and keeping creative conversations going among artists with an array of backgrounds: writers, painters, playwrights, poets, musicians, and composers. After these gatherings ended, the artists, it was very short-lived, less than a year. The artists kept in conversation at the Creative Arts Center, the Beit Toni Babat, the current Bahal Ma'akkal, which I mentioned earlier. This center was founded by an American Fulbright scholar, Philip Kaplan, in 1963. He served as the center's first director, along with the theater instructor, author, and actor Tesfaye Gassese, who served as deputy. Asfaw Damte notes that Gebre Kristos advised on visual arts and tried unsuccessfully to revive the group's meetings after Kaplan left the center. Short-lived as though they were, artists also actively developed networks of friends and supporters. The Association for Development of Ethiopian Music and Theater was established in 1965. They elected classically trained pianist Tsaggaye Dabalke as president. Iskender Bogosian initiated a young artists group. Ushatu Turuna, on his account of the history of the Fine Arts School, speaks about the attempt to create Ethiopian Painters Club or Association that also didn't last long. So, these cultural institutions, which began in the early years of the emperor's restoration, first began with Hagar Fikr Mahabar in 1942, followed by the Department of Music and Theater expansion at the municipality of Addis Ababa in 1946, to develop modern music and theater. There was a question about modern Ethiopian music. These are the ways that institutionally it begins to be taught and studied. The Ministry of Education and Fine Arts, which opened in 1941, had the emperor at its helm. And it also had traditional painters as Balacho Yimar, who painted portraits of the royal family and the interior of churches, were working alongside the few others trained in Europe as Aganyo Hungada throughout the 1940s at the ministry. The celebrations of the Grand Silver Jubilee of Emperor Haile Selassie provided further impetus to build new performance spaces at Hagar Fikr and Haile Selassie I Theatre, which staged groundbreaking works. Other performance arts also flourished throughout the 1960s, with the annual New Year festivals, which began in 1959, being hosted at these venues and transmitted over radio. Literary works commemorating the emperor were also published at this time. Now, by all accounts, Emperor Haile Selassie was a patron of the arts. He encouraged writers. He funded publications from his own pocket. He attended student arts presentations and exhibitions and theater openings. He offered a word of encouragement or observation. And there's even a story of him having borrowed they used to publish theater scripts at the time, and the emperor having borrowed or bought a script of one of Garsagai's translations of Shakespeare. I think it might be Othello, and how he'd made editing notes in the margins, the emperor. So he knew quite a few of this generation of artists personally, and he took personal interest in their progress. And so by doing so, knowingly or unknowingly, the emperor increased the visibility and prestige of the arts by hosting events at the palace, where he had a hall especially made fitted for performance. By the time the wave of artists who had studied abroad returned in the 1960s, public investment in cultural institutions had aligned with the artistic vision and ambition of these returnees. The little researched aspect, this is something I'm very interested in, is the how and in what ways these returning artists first began to work with the artists who were homegrown, especially in theater. And it might provide, I think, some really interesting insights into the push and pull of modernism and how it plays out in the day-to-day, in the creative work of artists. And so what happened? I mean, I question in my head. When Garsagay comes back and he begins casting people like Tasfai Sahalu and Aulacho Dejani and Tiasnak Ech and even some of the first generation of women artists, performing artists, theater artists, Askale Chamanshaw, Salamawit Gebre Selassie, what is the conversation there? In some instances, someone like Wazir Askale Chamanshaw, they grew up reciting the Bible. They don't necessarily, many of them don't necessarily read Amharic. They speak it and they recite it through prayer. So in the case of one of the women performing artists, I remember her saying, she had major roles in these plays, but I remember her saying the way she practiced her parts was with someone reading it to her. And then she'd memorize it, and then she'd play the part. So the written script was not so much, this speaks to this oral culture of kind of capturing orally through your ears what's going on, and then making some sense of it on the stage. Gebre Kristos Desta was also very close to people like Mary Armide, the Krar player. And so what happened when they interacted, and Mary's outsized personality and boundary pushing Krar songs and lyrics, what did Gebre Kristos make of that? So there's an exchange, and a very, very sort of important exchange taking place in between these artists at this time. A cultural institution that garnered immense public recognition and pride was the Haile Selassie I Prize Trust, which was established in 1963 and which promoted the growth of the arts, sculpture, painting, music, theater, and literature, among other areas as philanthropy, business, and industry. The award was hosted at the palace by the emperor, and it included a monetary gift of 7,000 Ethiopian birr for winners, as well as the prestige of peer-reviewed recognition, media coverage, and public programming. Haile Selassie I Prize Trust embodied the public investment made into elevating the arts and humanities. It gave 4 prizes for literature, Kabede in 1964, Tsaggai in 1966, Mengistu in 1967, and Haddis Alemayehu in 1968. And 3 prizes for fine arts, Afwerk Takle in 1964, followed by Gebre Kristos in 1965, and Iskender in 1967. Given that they were at the forefront of shaping contemporary art and literature, these artists continued to chide, goad, and provoke each other in discussion, unafraid to challenge existing norms. But equally, and I think Emily spoke to this, they collaborated creatively. So when Tsaggai ገብረመድህን staged his play Yakarmo So, Mulatu Astatke wrote the composition that's now very well known, Ethio jazz composition Yakarmo So. Gebre Kristos would create the backdrop of these plays at the Imperial Haile Selassie Theatre. I think it's Tsaggai's Hahubas and Destor. That backdrop still exists and is in use, that Gebre Kristos created with Taddese Masfin. And so in true modernist fashion, they appeared, poised to launch their lifelong creative labor of interrogation. Their writings included harsh self-examinations and critiques of the educated class, as well as cynical depictions of social and cultural backwardness, informed as it was by anti-colonial, Pan-African, and Black nationalist movements that reflected their impatience about the slow modernization unfolding in their country, and revealed their own understanding of what it meant to be an artist of this era. Shiferrao notes that though deep down critical of themselves and their social class, nevertheless they harbored profound conviction that they were on the threshold of a new epoch, with a profound sense of making history. The end of the imperial era set into motion a fragmentation of the cultural life of the city. With the coming of the Derg in 1974, a new era of socialist realism unfolded, and art that could not be put to propaganda use was roundly deemed irrelevant and wasteful. The cohesive sense of stability and creative safety was thus irrevocably shattered. This generation of artists scattered geographically, among them Solomon Desta and Gebre Kristos Desta, and those that remained adapted and navigated to keep finding meaning in their work. So let me take a moment to get us to Oklahoma. And that's the end and the beginning. Even in his passing, Gebre Kristos loomed large. Author and translator Haile Selassie Brhan Mariam notes, "Why does he keep coming up in my mind? It makes me feel disquieted. I haven't spoken to him. Besides, he is dead. He left for exile in the West during the Derg period, and he's died there. He never made it back. Still, it makes me feel disquieted. His works crisscross my conscience and remind me of him." This is Gash Haile Selassie in Shukkata. In his much lauded work, Matnei Gidgidda, which is part dirge and part delight, Poet Laureate Tsaggai evokes Oklahoma as the final unknown. The poem begins with an apparition of Gebre Kristos's presence before him, overlaid upon the four-cornered canvas on Oklahoma's facade, where the imprint of Ethiopia's soil, torn from its earth, has forever etched its poetry upon his soul. And I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here. I know some of you are speaking Amharic by osmosis at this point, but this is a poem worth reciting just because it's absolutely incredibly, it just makes the hair on my arm stand every time I hear it. The first time that I heard Gash Tsaggai reading it was at the National Museum of African Art. We had organized a birthday party for him in 2003, and Iskender had just passed away. So it became really a remembrance of both Iskender and Gebre Kristos for Gash Tsaggai there. And it was just incredibly, it's a love poem. It's a love poem of a friend to a friend. So I'll read a little bit of it, and I'll read my own translation of the Oklahoma section. But the Oklahoma section is extremely important to pay attention to. Matnei ይህ ግድግዳ ለሰዓሊ ገብረ ክርስቶስ ደስታ ነገው መጥኔ እስቲ ለምንድነው አሁን እዚህ ግድግዳ ላይ አይኔ ትክ ባለ ቁጥር እኔ የማነብ የሌለ ቅኔ ለምንድን ነው? በየዕለት ሕይወት አባባል ያለን እውነት ማስተዋል ብሂል ነበበ ነው ይላል። ምነው ታዲያን እስቲ አሁን እዚህ ነጭ ንጣፍ መሃል የሌለ ያልተጻፈ ቅርጽ ስውር ፊደል ይታየኛል። ለምንድን ነው ኢ ነቢብ የሚነበበኝ? ያልተሳለ የሚታየኝ ያልተቀረጸ ስዕል ገጽ የሌለ ፊት ትዝ የሚለኝ ለምንድን ነው? ወይንስ በኢድ ባህል ነው በነገረ ስላቅ ሀፍረት የታየኝን ባለማለት በኢ ነባቢ ፍርድ የታወርኩ የማየውን እንዳላየሁ ባለማየት እየሸፈንኩ ዓይኔን ከልቤ እየደበቅኩ የልቤን ከዓይኔ እየሸሸኩ በሰብአዊነት አንሼ ላለማስተዋል እየሰገድኩ እንደ ምሽት ጥላ ቅናሽ ቁልቁል እንደ ግቻ እያደግኩ መሆኔ ነው ያሳወረኝ። ያስተዋልኩትን እንደ ክድ እንዳልመሰክር ያጠረኝ እንጂ ያለበለዚያማ እዚህ ግድግዳ ላይ ዓይኔ ትክ ባለ ቁጥር እኔ ይሄ ከቶ የራቀ ገጽ ስውር ክልል ስዕል ይታየኛል። የተረሳው ይቀርበኛል። ገደቡን ጥሶ በግላጭ ተከስቶ ይነበበኛል። ይሄን ዓይኔ እውነታ ሲያይ ይሄን ተአምር ዓይኔ ይሄን ዓይኔ እውነታ ሲሳይ ይሄን ተአምር ዓይኔ ሲያይ ከካንቫሱ ቅርጽ ላማ ምጡቅ ርቀት ማዶ ሰማይ በህዋው ትኩረት ንጣፍ ላይ 4 ማዕዘን የስዕል ፍሬም ኦክላሆማ ግድግዳ ገጽ ከኢትዮጵያ አፈር ተበጭቆ እጣፏ ላይ ጥበብ ለመቅረጽ አጽም በሚል ርዕስ ነቀዝ ጥበብ ነፍሴ ላይ ሲገነዝ እባክሽ አሞራ ንገሪኝ እስትንፋሱስ እንዴት ነበር? ኦክላሆማ አፋፍ በራ ያዘቀዘቀችው ጀንበር የውርጭ ዶፍ የገረፋት የወርዶባት በረዶ ጠጠር የብቸኛ ጭላንጭሏን አስለምልማ ባዕድ አገር ስደት ፈፋ ስደት አፈር ቃት ፈልጥቃ ኑዛዜዋን በምህላ ስትናገር እባክሽ አሞራ ንገሪኝ እስትንፋሱስ እንዴት ነበር? የኢትዮጵያ ቀለም ሲሰበር እንዴት ነበር? ኦክላሆማ ቀዛዝ ሀገር ፍጻሜ ክራራይሶ ገባኤ ምትክ ይፈጠር እንዴት ነበር? አዬ የህልም መጭበርበር ኦክላሆማ ብሎ ነገር ነፍስ አቅዝዝ በረዶ ጠጠር እትብት አይሉት ነጭ አፈር እንዴት ነበር? ቅኔው ነፍሰ ገላ ነብር ገብሬ የቀለማት ደብር ጥበብ It gets me every time. ጥበብክን መቼም ተክኖ ላይተነትን የኛ ብዕር መወደስ መቀደስ እንጂ ብሩሽክን ትርቅ sorry I'm going to read that again. ቅኔ ነፍሰ ገላ ነብር ገብሬ የቀለማት ደብር ጥበብክን መቼም ተክኖ ላይተነትን የኛ ብዕር ማወደስ መቀደስ እንጂ ብሩሽክን ታሪክ ላይሰብር ቀለማት ማንጸባረቅን ረቂቅ ህዋ አድማስ ፈጠር ነበልባል እሳት ብሩሽክን ካንቫስ ሰማይ ሸራ ጠፍር እንዴት ነበር ማለት በቀር ላይተነትን የኛ ብዕር ታቅቦ በዲበ ኩሉ ሞትና ልደት የብቻው አበው ጥንትም እንደሚሉ ገብሬ ብቻህን ሞት ካሉ አሉ ማለቱንማ እንጂ ብሂልክንማ ላይገድሉ ርቀትክን ላያማልሉ በቅናት የተበተቡ ስዕለትክን ላይስሉ ተአምርክን ይኸው ዛሬም ከአጽናፍ ባሻገር በመጥራት እስክትሰየም በመንፈስ ግድግዳ ቀደህ በምታት መካከላችን አብርተህ ተከስተህ ከሰማያት ካንቫስ ሰንጥቀህ ከህዋው ገባሪ ስርወ ቀለማት ተጠለጠለ ደመናው ተለኮሰ ችቦ አድማሳት በህዋው ላይ ህብረ ብርሃን በነደደ እጅህ ግርፋት በእሳት በብሩሽ ጣር እሳት ቀለም የብርሃን ክብ ምጥቅጣት ከስተ ስዕለ ስቅላት በፍም ቀስት ስጋጃ ግርፍ ካንቫስ ላይ ላንቃ ክፍክፋት በአፍሪካ ሰረቀ ብርሃን በጮራ ርችት ግብአት በኪሩቤል ሰረገላ በማህበረ ሰማዕታት በመኑ በአምሳለ መኑ ተምሳለ ሰአለ ንጋት ፈነወ ገብረ ክርስቶስ በብሮሽ ስዕል እሳት በሰረጸ ካንቫስ ጮራው አይናችን እየቃተተ በየቤቱ ግድግዳ ገጽ ቅብአ ልቡ እየዋተተ በዓለም ብዕር ብሩሽ ጦሩ እሳቱን እንደከሰተ አልሞተም ገብረ ክርስቶስ ነደደ እንጂ መቼ ሞተ? I wanted to end So you see, in my, I'm going to go to the English because maybe I'll capture some of this. But in this book, this is the thing I carry around when I get to. So Garsagai sits here, Gebre Kristos is there, Solomon is there. We carry these people around with us for a reason, of course, but we carry them around. So this poem follows a guy's heart-wrenching realization that his charismatic, supremely gifted friend, who was snatched from this vibrant setting of creativity and community, may have died in isolation in a faraway land. He pleads with a buzzard in the sky to share what it might have witnessed in Gebre Kristos's final hour. And so he says, I beseech of you, tell me, buzzard. Those images of those eagles in the mural brought this to me when I saw what Bakala and Jay had done, the group, the students had done of the mural. I beseech of you to tell me, buzzard, how was his breathing? The day that dawn flew to the edges of Oklahoma and tilted downside up, the freezing dew flooding in pellets of snow, her lonely, lilting light wavering in a foreign land, exile earth, flickering confessions made final, covenants scattered. I beseech of you, tell me, buzzard, how was his breathing when the colors of Ethiopia forever shattered? How was it all? Oklahoma, frozen land, final prayers, no way to reclaim or regenerate. How was it all? Mirage dreams turned surreal nightmare. What of this place, Oklahoma? Biting wind, snow turned to stone. No placenta to connect, the earth white and barren. How was it all? So today, we get to reimagine this ending. On behalf of all those who love him, who love them, all of them, this generation, we get to embrace the glowing embers of Gebre Kristos's spirit and to understand that our presence here in participation is another kind of homecoming, honoring the life and contributions of an extraordinary poet and painter, Gebre Kristos Desta. Today marks a beginning, a full recognition that Gebre Kristos's eternal flame refuses to burn out, but renews in our own commitment to keep studying, exhibiting, publishing, debating, and reviving his works. My deepest gratitude to those who organized this gathering and to those not in this room and further away who've continued to tend to the fire and have given tirelessly of their time and energies in keeping Gebre Kristos's name and stories alive. Thank you. As we wrap up, I'd like Emily's help in just bringing Gebre Kristos to the room as well. And I thank you for your attention.
Alo, hayal Brahma. Alo, hayal Brahma. ይቀሰቅሰኛል ጩኸቱን ስሰማ በሰውነቴ ላይ ይፈጥራል መሸበር ያቅበዘብዘኛል። አለው ስተባበር አለው መች የተተኮሰ እሳተ ገሞራ ገንፍሎ የጨሰ መብረቅ የተናደ መብረቅ የወረደ ገደል የተናደ ማዕበል ጉድጓድ መስሎ ይጠራለሁ በደነግጣለሁ። ያንገፈግፈኛል እንዳለው ከኔ እጄ ሲርበተበት ይጠፋል እግሬ። የሰርግ አዳማቂ ነው አዶ ሸባ ሙሽራ ሲያባባ በጥበብ ኳኳታ ድልቅ ብሎ ሰው የሚያተራምስ ጋር አስከትሎ ሀዘን መቃብር ነው ጸሎትና ፍታት የሚመታው ደረት የአልቃሾቹ ስሜት ይጠራል ከጉድጓድ የጠፋውን በአፈርና ድንጋይ ተሽምታጥ ነው። የቤተ ክርስቲያን የሃይማኖት ፍቅር የሼኮች ጊዜ ነው የአምልኮት መደብር። ያመጣል ሁካታ የጥምቀት ጭፈሮ ከበሮ ያመጣል ጉስቶች ጃግረሮቹን ሁልጊዜ እንቁጣጣሽ ለሚጨፍሩትን ያመጣል ከጫካ ገዳዮችን ይዞ ጦር እየጠበቀ ጎራዴውን መርቶ ድምፅ ነው የሹመት ወይም የጦርነት የአረመኔ ጥሪ የተነሳ ታጠቅ ጠላት ኮባር ተስናረት የፈረስ ኮቴ ሽምጡ ሶንሶማ አዋራት ያስነሳል የሚያሰዋ ናዳው የተባለበት ደረጃ መሬት የሚያናጋ ተብለው ብቻ ጊዜን የሚለካ ሰዓት እየለየ ሲጠፋ ሲተካ የሙዚቃ ውሉ ማሰሪያው ሸምቀቆ ባይቶ እንኳን አለ ከስር ተደብቆ የሚያስተጋባ ነው ዜማው ተሰብስቦ ሁላው ረገሎ ተሸብቶ ጌተማማንባ ዛሉ ዋዜ የአካል ንቅናቄ አገር ሙዚቃ ተሽከርካሪ መንፈስ እያነሳ አቋርጦ ይመጣል ሲሮጥ ከሩቅ አገር ቤቴን ለመበዝበዝ ልቤን ለማሸበር
It's a poem about rhythm, the drum, kavaro. So, and then it goes through all the, the gallops of the horses and the music of the church and the call of the bilal, and he goes through all of the sounds. And then there's hula hoop, hooka boogie woogie, zamarawi mambo, and then he goes into like a conga line. It's this is Gebre Kristos for you. Are we going to do Q&A? How are you all feeling? Do a couple of questions if you wish. But also we're happy to leave it here. Yes? Yeah, I can.
Was Kristos known more for his literary art or visual art?
The $1,000,000 question is still being debated. I think because he, I can stand. Thank you. I think because he wrote in Amharic, that's kind of stayed. People were able to recite it, and there's a lot of handwritten copies, exchanging hands, among his students. And yeah, over the years, as when we were getting ready to create this book, I consulted with quite a few of them, and we managed to patch things together, go to the newspapers from now. And I think because he wrote in Amharic, there was the sort of the repeating of it brought it to life a lot more. So the poetry was very close, like people could refer to it in a more accessible way, I think, than the paintings for a long time. Yeah.
So was the answer poetry or?
open-ended.
It's one of the things you brought up in your talk.
Yes.
So your question is very good.
Yes, yes. No, I don't think it's been resolved. I mean, there have been heated debates for years about this. So, yes, yes. I think you get. Yes, there wasn't a division of it in him. I think it was two forms of expression that he was a master of. So, yes, plenty to debate. Yes, sir.
As it's a matter of exposure, in a sense, this phone, millions of Ethiopians have access to
Yes.
by different means. However, his artwork is attraction. Even in Ethiopia, I don't know, very few people have that access.
Yes.
So in terms of the public at large, of course, this phone. But for intellectual elite,
Yes.
including people, some might, I don't know, these artworks. So I take open question.
Yes. Yes, I feel very fortunate for both. I don't, I'm grateful for both sides of it, but I think, yes, the poetry is definitely more accessible to most. And now, because there's voice recordings of him out there, and also just this little publication is here, and people are picking up bits and pieces of it to perform and bring back to life, I'd say, yes, the poetry seems a lot more accessible. Yeah.
What was the number of pages? Somebody gave a number of pages that you get done, because they know those that you're aware of. And how many pages were there?
It would be, I would think so. In private collections, there's a whole lot still.
So that's huge. in
It is.
itself.
It is, and he exhibited very internationally as well as locally. I mean, he was prolific in both forms, I would say. Yeah.
In Oklahoma alone, he had about 47 pages.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
Less than a year.
So now I've had to work in law extensively. I'm gonna be able to look at estate sales and yard sales, because there very well could be some that we haven't found.
Absolutely. Onji, did you have your hand up, or am I? Yeah. Okay.
I have no words. It was extraordinary, this presentation. It made us all emotional. And I just want to start by saying that.
Thank you.
I've never seen anything like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
The last question, I'm just thinking, from my own professional background, it's not that easy to have paintings and artworks out to the public at large, whereas music, theater, literature are just accessible. So, although he worked with both mediums, which were so normal for him, I think even the radio contributes for the divulgation of his literary products.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's what it is. And then unlike Ahoy Kennedy, who is known, I mean, people are more familiar with Ahoy Kennedy's works at a public level because he had made the stained glass, and he was very good at self-promotion, and the muscat flower, and he was already in the textbooks, and then there were also books written, and he was really, really good at advertising his work and his persona also as an artist, whereas Gebre was a different type of person, but it always boils down to exhibition spaces. Okay, how many exhibition spaces did we have at that time, and how many do we have
Even now, yes.
Even now, so I think that's where
The access points, yeah, absolutely. There's Gashmulato swears by this, that he's recorded Gebre Kristos even on television, performing this poem with Gashmuli playing the congas, something like the Gashmuli's playing the congas. Have you seen it? Abata recorded, but it's Gashmulato playing the congas and Gebre Kristos reciting. So to your point of even on television, for people who remember or who might have caught it, and radio, between radio and television and the newspapers, the prolific, people, you would read newspapers. There were so many weekly and daily publications of newspapers where Gebre Kristos's poems appeared. So, I had I had 4 months to go through just hundreds and hundreds of newspapers to pull this book together. But it goes to show, I mean, we are not of that generation to remember it in real time, but it was out there, like people had access to it, So, and then besides, I think his students have kept him alive, Gebre Kristos, because he taught at the art school. Acha, Wasani, other generations that have interacted with him talk about him all the time, his poetry, his charisma. So it's like he's still alive among several generations of people in Addis Ababa. He stayed and was very much not, Iskandar's taught for maybe 3 years and left, but Gebre Kristos stayed and taught for a long time. Afwerk did not teach, so that's another access point. He was very much a part of a community of artists, Gebre Kristos, in that sense. So for various reasons, I think, the poetry may have been out there longer and had a further reach. Than his paintings. Wendy, I'd love to hear from you about any thoughts or memories that might come, from you hearing Gebre Kristos and or these, this context of that generation of artists that you were a part of.
I don't know what to say. I'm so aware of not having been able to grasp what was going on around me in those days. I didn't feel comfortable with Gebre Kristos
Because
one-on-one, and I didn't have access to him any other way. I was not a student, so I couldn't go and be in class or something like that. And so over the years since then, I've found out more, I've learned more, I've had access to more, and that has been really important. And this is an amazing venue. I can't get over it. I have so much to take home and think about. And if you're not Ethiopian, you get caught in your own mistakes, where you come from, whatever's going on in your head because of that. And so, I'll say one thing. This is a weird thing to say at this point. There was an American writer in Ethiopia at the time who knew Gebre Kristos and wrote a book. You may be familiar with it. It's called Krubi.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I have never been. I have to tell you, one of my daughters has been living with this writer's son for the last 30 years. So it's not like I don't have access to that, but I don't have psychological access to it. So I went, tried to read it in the old days. I tried to read it again now because there being a painter in the book who is, they tell me, modeled on Gebre Kristos, but I cannot read this book. Because that kind of presentation of what you are all talking about is off the mark and presumptuous, and I can't do that. So I can sit and listen to Amharic, which I do not understand, but I do understand the
emotions,
impulse of it, the need for it, and the authenticity of the voice. So I'm just grateful to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The family, yes, we're ready to wrap up? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. No, I was going to say the family, it's a big honor to also have the family here with us to celebrate Gebre Kristos, because we all have a piece of Gebre Kristos. They have a bigger piece of Gebre Kristos, but it's good to put all those pieces together to celebrate them. So thank you very, very much for being us. Yeah, honestly, for honoring us. Yes. Yes, please.
I'm so thrilled to hear the voices of women artists here.
Oh, yay! Yay!
Thank you so much, Heran, for wrapping us up in such a beautiful way. And I also want to thank all of our participants, whether you spoke, whether you listened, everyone who's been present. Thank you so much for the last 2 days. So just a couple of logistical notes from here. The first is that there is a shuttle outside that is waiting to take us to the mural. The owners of the building have generously offered a drink, and I'm going to suggest that we have a quick drink and toast at the mural. And then we'll go across the street to the Resonator, where there is dinner waiting for you. We are going to try to be a little hasty in our drink and dinner because of the weather. We have been following the weather carefully, and we are presently in a tornado watch region. The forecasters have been kind of expecting that our region is not particularly in a high-risk zone today, which is why I'm only mentioning it now. But I also would be glad for you all to be in a safe place, perhaps back at Noun by about 7 o'clock. So why don't we quickly kind of gather things? You can leave things here in the Russell Center. I'm happy to come back with you after. And the shuttle is just outside in the same parking lot as yesterday. And again, we'll have a quick drink and toast, see the mural, and have some dinner together to wrap up our time. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.